Good morning. Welcome to Broomfield, Colorado and Total Escape Games. My name is John Stevens. I'm your host today. I am joined today by two professional Magic players. Josh Speranza has played on the Pro Tour twice. Lee Marino has also played on the Pro Tour twice. Lee's going to be qualified for his third Pro Tour already. He'll be playing BFZ Milwaukee. Congrats, Lee.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, guys. Today we're going to build a sealed deck pool out of your Battle for Zendikar pre-release packs. As they're opening up that pack, I'm going to ask them a couple of questions today. Guys, what common are you most wanting to see this morning?
I think I like Sheer Drop. I think that might be the best common in the set. Kills a creature. Also, the Awaken is pretty good late game. I also like Clutch of Currents. Clutch of Currents.
I believe so.
The blue
Awaken that basically is the unsummon. Or
yeah, bounce a guy and Awaken for 5 mana. I think that's pretty strong because you also get to put a creature into play. So it's a pretty good tempo swing.
What about you, Josh?
Anything with Awaken is going to be really good. I feel like that's going to be a super strong mechanic, and it's great to see. But for me, I want to appeal to my Timmy side a little bit. I'm really excited to play a card like Silent Skimmer. It doesn't look real great on the surface, but I think it could have some hidden potential there. A nice big body in the air that can work well on defense, gumming up a creature early, possibly even do some work once it starts attacking, and the loss of life can be relevant versus damage sometimes.
What about uncommons, guys?
You know what I'm going to say.
For me, I'm going to go first on this one. For me, it's the retreat cycle in general, but the retreat to Kazandu, I believe, is the green one. That's going to be where I think the retreats are going to be just really, really solid and limited. They give you 2 relevant effects all across the board. Anytime, with the landfall mechanic, I remember original Zendikar, landfall was just a terrific mechanic, and I'm really excited to see that back. And the ability to boost up your creatures and also get other relevant effects when you don't have creatures in play means that they're never dead. Know where Lee's going here, so I'm going to let him at it.
So I'm like the reddest mage, so I got to say Rolling Thunder. I think the card is just like a huge beating. I wanna have like 14 lands in play and like 7 Eldrazi Scions, and I just want to like sack everything and hit my opponent for like 1 million. That's what I want to do. I think also Stasis Snare, the white Journey to Nowhere, the instant, is really, really powerful because it's going to get any creature your opponent has in play. It's an instant. It's always going to be good. Part of me, too, though, really wants to check out the Eldrazi processors because I think that's a really cool idea in the set, like being able to ingest a bunch and, get processing a little bit.
Some of the triggers, I'm a big fan. So first off, I have to make a comment about Rolling Thunder. Hate the fact that card's at uncommon. It's just too good and limited, and being at uncommon means it's going to pop up a lot more. So note to everybody out there, pay attention. If your opponent's playing red, watch for Rolling Thunder. Also, one more thing about the processor, really excited, huge fan of Mystic Snake. The fact that there's a Mystic Snake wannabe in the set is really fun for me.
In your dream world, what rare are you opening today?
In my dream world, I am opening Gideon. 4 mana, super aggressive creature, comes down, can make the 0/2s for a 0 ability, can turn into just a beating of an attacker. Looks like it can be a fairly slow format is my initial impression. So having a card that can hit that hard and come down that fast seems like it'll be really strong.
I think I gotta agree with Josh. I think Gideon is probably the best rare you can probably open. Part of me though really wants to make the Ulamog deck work. I really want to try to get Ulamog, try to get like a bunch of ramp stuff, a bunch of Eldrazi Scions, and just like go for it. I really want to try that out. But I think Gideon is probably the best rare in the set in terms for limited and maybe also for constructed.
Go ahead and open those packs, guys. We'll start sorting this out. While you're sorting this, talk to me about archetypes and sealed for this.
Looking at it last night, first thing that really stands out, again, with my belief that this is going to be a slower format, However, if you're able to open a really nice red-white allies deck, get maybe the rare, the ambush leader, I think you can build something that can be really solid and can just put you in a position where you can just win really quickly and run over the people that are sitting there trying to ramp out their big Eldrazi spells, things like that. Other things that I saw, anything with the ingest, if you can build somewhat of more of like a black-blue control deck, cards like this one right here that I just happen to have in my hand, Dominator Drone, seems like a card that'll be really good in a format like that. And then the one that I want to mention is going to be the Converge cycle, and seeing if anybody, first off, if you open enough cards with Converge, and second, great card we just opened for a sealed pool.
Fun.
And just ultimately getting to a point where you can cast your 4 and 5 color spells and getting the full effect of the Converge.
What about in draft?
Lee, you had a chance to look
Yeah,
at draft.
I think draft is going to speed up a little bit. I think blue seems really deep to me, guys, because it's got a lot of really good commons. Like we already talked about the Clutch of Currents. There's also the guy that was similar to the Origins card that bounces a creature. So I think you can get a lot of mileage out of blue. Draft is obviously going to speed up a little bit compared to sealed, right? So you maybe you have to have a deck that can stave off maybe like an early aggro assault from some allies like red-white allies. I still really want to try to go into some of the Eldrazi stuff in draft. I think blue-black looks really fun for an Eldrazi deck. Red-white looks really fun for like an allies beatdown kind of deck. I think, like Josh said, if you're playing green, you're probably playing maybe 2 or 3 colors because you can start to get into some of the Converge kind of stuff. Another thing I think is really good is the landfall deck. I think is really good. If you're like red-green in draft and you have like the landfall deck, there's a lot of creatures that they're like a 2/2 but they become a 3/3, or they're a 2/2 but they become a 4/4, and a lot in red and a lot also in green. And if you're making land drops, these creatures can just come across for a lot of damage and your opponent can't really block very profitably. So I think if you like to beat down like I like to beat down, I think going red-green and landfall is pretty good. Obviously it's not great when you're on defense, but I think it kind of depends too, guys, like what rares you get. I mean, white seemed to me to be a pretty shallow color, but white also has, I think, some of the best rares like Quarantine Field and the Wrath of God, the 5-mana Wrath of God. So those are cards that you probably want to play white if you open, but white to me doesn't necessarily have a ton of depth in like the commons and uncommons. I think that blue probably has the best commons and uncommons. I like this card. I want this. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I want to make that card work in constructed. I want to try.
One more thing about the landfall mechanic, and one card in particular that I'm a bit excited to see if it works, is the Sledge, the one that when it attacks, you can return a land to your hand and give your creature +2/+2. And then number one, you get a good equipment to juice up your creatures. Number 2, you get to keep triggering your landfall because you're picking up that land every turn. So something might be a little too fancy, but we could see. Also going to make a comment about a card that we opened that I'm really excited about. I was a big fan of the first iteration of this card, so I'm really happy to see From Beyond here.
Sweet.
I'm trying to remember the name of the first one that produced a 0/1 from Zendikar. It was a 3-color, 3-mana enchantment.
Awakening Zone, maybe?
Awakening Zone, that's it. So we got the new Awakening Zone. Now you have to pay 1 more, but you get 1/1s instead of 0/1s.
Trying to find all our rares here.
So you've opened up your 6 packs there.
Mm-hmm.
What jumps out at you? What are we excited about today?
Excited about our rares and the synergy they could have together. In particular, the From Beyond that we originally saw. This here, Beast Color Savant, giving us some more options. Omnath, I think that card is just going to be silly good.
This guy I think is a beating if you can cast him. He's a little color intensive, but I can't imagine your opponent wins a game if this is on the field for more than, what, a turn or two, because every time you get a landfall, you get a 5/5. So if they kill it, you get to kill one of their guys most likely because it deals 3 damage. So this card seems super solid. I mean, looks like we're probably going to be green at least. So
Yeah.
anytime we do a sealed deck, guys, what we're kind of looking for here is we want to look at the rares first to see what color, you know, that drags us into. Your rares are most often going to be your most powerful cards for sealed. And right here we have 3 pretty decent rares in green. So I think Josh and I are going to at least consider or probably start with making a green, maybe rampy kind of deck with From Beyond, maybe some Eldrazi. Definitely trying to play this Omnath, Locus of Rage if we can, depending on what else we have. But we have a couple black rares too, don't we?
We do, yep. We have some good black cards here that, you know, they both have flying. They both hit hard in the air with the landfall on that one. Yeah.
+1/+0 or +2/+0 if it's a swamp. So not bad. Probably need to see what else we have in green maybe for starters.
Talk people through this process as you're looking at those. What makes a card playable?
Really, it's a matter of, you know, especially in sealed, you're looking at 2 things. You're looking at, number one, trying to set up something that's cohesive. It all comes together. But slightly more important than that, you're looking at, you're really taking into consideration curve and power. Number one, you're in sealed, you're in a format that's probably going to go a little bit longer, barring mana problems. You're going to be in a situation where you're going to have a higher opportunity to draw your late game cards and cast your big expensive spells. So make sure you have at least a couple of those. But on the flip side to that, you don't want to just get ran over while you're sitting there building up. So you want to look for cards that either help you get to your late game by accelerating your mana, or just come down and can block, have relevant effects. You know, I'll use this Side Leopard here as a great card that it really depends on where you're going with your deck. If you're looking at building an aggressive deck, you're playing lots of low drops, just trying to deal as much damage as possible, this card looks like it could be really good. However, if our goal ends up with this deck ends up being trying to get up to this Omnath, or trying to cast some, you know, these more expensive spells, then it's really not going to do much for us. So that's the type of things that we're looking at. So what's your first thoughts of the green here?
Looks okay, maybe not outstanding. I mean, I think I would be happy to play a lot of these cards. I'm not sure, again, about the Leopard for reasons that you said. A lot of these look like more sideboardy kind of cards, actually. I think this Seek the Wilds is probably fine, but I don't necessarily want to main deck a Reclaiming Vines because, you know, it's kind of like a destroy artifact, enchantment, or land kind of effect. This Defender is maybe a sideboard answer to some aggro decks, but not great. This is probably fine, this Pump spell. We have a Plummet as well for our sideboard probably, but maybe not a ton of great cards, although I really like Eyeless Watcher. It's kind of like Nest Invader used to be. It makes 2 of the 1/1, so it can ramp us. I mean, it's only a 1/1 body, but it can pretty easily ramp us. Because I'm pretty sure I want to play this card. But we're looking for more of probably a rampy sort of deck, so I don't know if like something like this is going to make the cut. But if we're going to be ramping, what kind of, do we have any? This guy seems really good because he can add colorless mana. He's also a 4/4 for 5. And, you know, we could probably play this card as well, this 7 mana, 7/8, that if we can process a card, gains us 5 life. So we can probably play a couple of those. This is probably fine as a removal spell. I'm trying to make green-red work because I really want to play Omnath, so
With
I don't
that
know.
said, we'll take a look at our red here. Gotta read some of these.
That guy's probably fine.
Good aggressive ally creature.
That guy's good too.
Definitely.
Guy's more than playable as well.
Maybe cast color spell. This guy. I mean, this guy's a consideration because he's got a big enough body that he can come down and just kind of gum up the ground, which is one thing that you definitely want to consider if you're looking at building a ramp deck. Belligerent Whiptail is a fine card. Processor Assault. If you Definitely a card worth looking at, but we need to see if we have anything
Enough
going
enablers
on.
for that.
As we learned in original Zendikar, anything that is an invoker is always going to be worthwhile. Good body for a good cost, plus if you get him in the late game, he just turns into a good effect. Really good aggressive card, maybe not what we're looking for if we are looking to ramp with this one. This one's probably not going to make the cut here.
That guy's fine
that guy
and
looks
maybe
just
not
fine.
outstanding. We got 2 of that guy, which is not bad.
Not really looking at destroying lands, even if it is an instant speed Stone Rain.
I like this card because it's a 5 mana, 5 damage, or
only
more,
gets better from there, and
Yeah,
it's
so
instant,
it's a little expensive, but still, I think more than playable. That guy, maybe if we have enough allies, he has to attack every turn unless we control another ally, and I think that card's bad.
I think it's fine if you're going for the super aggressive deck, which we are definitely not looking at with this particular.
As another incentive to play red, we have this Blighted Gorge. These lands, guys, can kind of get lost in your guys' extra stuff in your pack, but if you have one that's on color, you almost certainly want to play it. They all have a really powerful effect. This one in particular deals 2 damage, so it's basically like running a free shock. I think one of them does one of them draw you cards? I mean, that's insane if one of them draws you cards. I think maybe the blue one draws you cards. A lot of these are really good, so I would always check and make sure that you have one of these. And if there's nothing really in the pack for you, these will almost always make the cut if they're on color in your deck for draft, especially. So be on the lookout for these. So we definitely probably want to, I think we've got enough to get there. We're definitely playing this Touch of the Void because that's removal, right?
Absolutely. One other thing about the land, especially if you're playing a deck with a lot of landfall, you're going to want to look at 18, 19 lands, playing that extra couple of lands. So when you have the ability to play a land like that one, which serves as your extra land as well as an extra spell, there's absolutely no reason why you'd ever look away from that.
Yeah, I think this might be an 18-land format unless you have like the red-white super aggressive allies deck, because you really do want to make sure you always get to 4, maybe always get to 5. Oh, I missed that guy. That guy might be
good.
That might be better than this.
Yeah,
for
especially
our top
considering
end.
we have the enchantment, the From Beyond there.
Oh, because we can always keep bringing him back. Yeah, that seems really good for.
You know, going back to Omnath for just a second and talking about playing those extra lands, why with this deck I could potentially even see considering that 19th land. The last thing you want to do is get up to your 7 mana, cast your Omnath, and then have it just be that 5/5. It's still good, it's still fine, you're still going to be happy with it, but how much more happy are you going to be with it when it starts pumping out those tokens?
So guys, we've got like 26 cards here or something, so now me and Josh are maybe looking at what cards can we maybe shave off. The 2 that I'm looking at are maybe starting with this Processor Assault, because I'm not seeing a ton of ways to, what's the mechanic? Ingest? If we don't, like this technically ingests because it exiles their creature. But I'm not, other than that, I'm really not seeing a ton of ways to ingest. This guy doesn't ingest. Neither does this guy. This guy just ramps us. Maybe a combat trick isn't great, or maybe the Seek the Wilds because our mana's probably good. This guy also doesn't ingest, and he's also just a 1/1. I guess he does leave behind a Scion. The Beastmaster's probably okay. We have a couple out. We have like kind of a small ally theme happening here in this deck. We also have like a ramp spell, so I may be thinking about cutting maybe these 4 cards to start and seeing what that leaves us with, because I think clearly cutting this, right, because we just don't have really a way to cast it. I don't know if we're aggressive enough to want to play this Reckless Cohort. I think we don't want it to attack each turn, and I think we want to just wait until we get to something bigger. So maybe we cut this guy. I don't know if Josh has any good ideas about maybe Seek the Wild, Swell.
Well, from here, what I really want to do is really just start laying it out, because this is where the curve consideration comes into play.
I'm going to stop you right there for a second. Before we lay that out, we've built a very top-down deck here. We had some rares we really wanted to play, so we started there. You open a sealed pool that doesn't have those rares that jump out at you, I'd kind of like to go back and look at the 3 colors we're not playing.
Well, absolutely, and that's going to be part of the process. That's definitely going to, even if we initially want to take a look at that deck, that's our rares. This is where really laying it out comes into play for me. So part of my normal build process is I'm going to lay out this green-red deck. I'm going to take a look at it and say, okay, is this something I'm comfortable playing? Does it look like I can survive long enough to get to my bombs? Can I ramp? Can I get, does the deck come together? Okay, looks good. Now let's look at the other cards. So we'll do that now then. We'll basically jump ahead a little bit because even though this looks good and we get to play our bombs, we might be missing something in our other colors because we haven't spent a lot of time on those yet. So now we're going to move into, so we definitely want to, you definitely want to look into that aspect of it because a good synergistic deck with a lot of removal and a lot of ability to interact with your opponent is definitely going to be better for you than just playing your couple of bombs.
Yeah, so I'll maybe go through the blue while Josh checks out the black cards, but these first couple cards here, like this Clutch of Currents, this is the common that I told you guys about, returning a creature to its owner's hand, but also getting a 3/3 land into play for 5 mana makes this card really, really good. If your deck is aggressive, it can really put your opponent behind if you bounce their like 3 or 4 drop. This card is really solid. Also, this Eldrazi Sky Spawner is also a really solid card. It's a 2/1 flyer for 3, so it has evasion. Really good card. It also puts a Scion into play as well, so you get a little extra value. It can ramp you into like a 5 drop or so. This is one of the cards Josh was talking about, the Coastal Discovery. It's already fine as a divination, a draw 2 cards, but if you can awaken 4 on top of this, you also have a really good threat on the board as well. So these are all really powerful cards in blue, and these are what I was talking about in terms of the common and uncommon cycle in blue is really good this time around. So this guy is a perfect example of a good ingest enabler. He can't be blocked. I get that he's only a 1/4, but you can leave him on defense if you need to get in there so you can enable like a processor. He can't be blocked, so it's really easy to, oh, I forgot we had that.
Well, I just got some clarification on that. We're going to build this, try and give you an idea of building more of a regular sealed pool, so we're going to pretend that you're not getting a crazy good promo, because in a regular sealed event, that's what's going to be the case.
Anyways, moving on, this Oracle of Dust is, we have a lot of solid cards. The only ones that we probably can't immediately say are playable are these Brilliant Spectrums, because in order to get them to work, we really need to have some converge happening. So we need our deck to be multiple colors, have mana fixing, that sort of thing. But a lot of these blue commons and uncommons in here, even the Rush of Ice, the Oracle of Dust, are really, really solid, and I would love to have them in one of my decks. Like John said, if we don't get those rares that we're looking for, what are we looking for? And these are always going to be solid cards for you guys to make your deck in sealed or draft. So make sure you guys check them out. Also, speaking of blue, if we have this land, we probably always want to play this land in a blue deck. Just like in a black deck, we would always play this land because the effect is really, really strong. So always make sure you add these to your decks if they're on color. Don't add them if you're not playing that color, obviously.
All right, so I'll jump in and talk about the black for a minute. If Lee, you want to look through the white. What we have with black, we have some great top end with our 2 black rares that we got, the Gul'Draz's Overseer and the Smothering Abomination. But from there, black dries up really quickly. So this is a color that I would easily dismiss in the long run, and ultimately here's why. Outside of these 2 cards here, we have a lot of dependent cards that we don't necessarily have the right tools to feed what they're dependent upon. For example, we have 2 copies of Altar's Reap. We have in here this, I just lost it, this Voracious Knoll. If you're a deck that, like if we were going black-green and with the rare enchantment that produces the tokens every turn, some way to just produce a lot of creatures on the cheap without losing card advantage, then these cards would be fantastic. Sometimes they're fine in general. Altar's Reap in particular as an instant, your opponent targets one of your creatures with a removal spell, you can just be like, well, instead I'm going to draw 2 cards. Altar's Reap is a card I actually really like, but I like to know that I can trigger it myself without sacrificing something that I want. We also have a Demon's Grasp. It looks like it's going to be a very solid removal spell. Rising Miasma. I'm not sure about this one because I don't know how relevant the -2 is going to be. Under normal circumstances, -2/-2 would be amazing. You'd slam this into your deck and never look back. But if your opponent is sitting there just playing 3/4s, 4/5s, 5/6s, then it becomes really a do-nothing. It is worth noting it's another card with Awaken, which is always going to be strong. From there, we have a Carrier Thrall. Not, it's a fine. It's a 2 mana. It's good in an aggressive deck as it leaves behind a Scion. Dominator Drone. This is a card that is very good, I do believe. It's got the Ingest. And then we got a couple of other ones here, but nothing that I'm super excited for in the black.
While we're skipping black, is there a common or uncommon you really wish you saw there?
Common or uncommon? Not really. I'm not real impressed with black so far.
I think maybe the best black common is the Mind Rot, like the 4-mana Mind Rot that awakens. That might be just the best because it's a Mind Rot, which is always a 2-for-1, which is decent. Yeah, Myers, Malice. But again, you get a little extra value if you cast it for 6 because you get a creature out of the deal. You get a 3/3. 3/3 and Mind Rot in one spell is not the worst.
So what do we have in white, Lee?
In white, we got a lot of these solid removal spells like I told you guys about at common. Sheer Drop, I think, might be the best common in the set. Gideon's Reproach is also super solid. These guys, I think, are better in like a beatdown deck because they have the landfall. They get really big if you have landfall. So if you can stay on the aggressive, it's not a great blocker because it's only a 2/3, but if you're attacking with it with some landfall, this card's pretty strong. Like I'm envisioning like a red-white ally beatdown deck for this card. We got a couple of the core ally guys. All these cards are fine. We've got this Serene Steward. This card I think is actually pretty good. Again, it's an Awaken card. If you guys have an Awaken card, take a second look at it because a lot of times if you can cast it for its Awaken cost, like Josh was saying earlier, it's probably going to be a pretty solid spell because you get not only the effect of the spell but additional value on the card later on. We got a flyer here, another early ally. I don't particularly like any of these cards I have towards the end. A lot of times, 1/1s and 2/1s for 1, even if it's a flyer, aren't super solid because they're just going to become outclassed very, very quickly. Like I was telling you guys about white earlier, I think it has some of the most powerful rares, but I think if you don't get some of those powerful rares, you kind of want to stay away from white. Blue, for example, seems a lot stronger if you don't have the rares. You got a lot of solid commons, a lot of solid uncommons. We still have some good removal spells, but I think your good white decks are going to have, your Quarantine Fields, your Gideons, the big Angel, the Emeria Angel. You want to have those big white rares that are really, really powerful before you consider going into white.
And a lot of that too has to do with the simple fact that white and draft versus white and sealed. White and draft could be a lot better as you can put together a much more cohesive deck, whereas to get the critical mass of good white early cards you need, chances are you're not going to open that with just 6 random packs.
Let's go ahead and lay out that deck we talked about to start then.
All right. I'll move all this stuff maybe off to the side. 2. So one thing we're always going to consider while laying this out is, Josh and I are going to be looking at our curve, and what we mean by curve is just where do our spells fall? Do we have too many things that cost way too much mana? Do we not have anything to do early where we're maybe going to get, run over by an aggressive deck? That's the kind of thing that we're looking at in terms of when we're laying this out, because we want to have a good mix of early spells, but we also want to have some late game haymakers, which it looks like our deck will have. 6. We got this guy I like a lot. Let's see, we got this ramp spell. And we have too many cards here. I think I want to cut this guy.
Yeah, I don't think it has enough of an effect. So what are we looking at here total? We got
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So we're pretty close to a deck. Was that right? 6, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So we're pretty close to a deck. I think we probably want to play 18 lands because we have, some heavy hitters. But this card, basically what we're looking at our top end is Omnath and this Deathless Behemoth. as well as this Beastmaster. I think all these are really, really strong cards. We've got some decent removal in Stone Fury, Touch of the Void. I wish we had like the green fight card, but we don't. Is there a cut that you want to make, Josh, or what do you think of this deck now that you're looking at it and it's all laid out? We have some of the aggressive landfall guys. We have this guy and this guy are some of the landfall aggressive creatures.
Does that change the number of lanes you want to play today?
I think so. I think landfall. I think 18 lands is important so that you can play your big drops, but extra lands aren't always the worst because of landfall. Another thing you want to consider, guys, is a lot of times you'll play a land anytime you have a land in your hand. Sometimes it's right in this format to hold lands because if you draw one of those creatures later on, you might want to be able to pump them up or get their effect later on. Especially something with Omnath. Like if we know we have Omnath in our deck, we always want to be holding at least one land. We don't want to play all of our lands out and then not have a way to trigger the Omnath if we have it.
Looking at this deck, my first inclination is really the McKindy Slide Runner. That's a card that I just don't think fits what we're ultimately trying to do with this deck. It is nice, and I'd love to play it in a good aggressive deck, but I don't know that card does enough for us. As you know, even attacking as a 3/2 trample is fine, but that's it. It's only good when it's one of those cards that, like many of the landfall cards, are really only shine when they're attacking. However, the counter argument to that is, as a 2/1 for 2, it's something that comes down early and can certainly play a good game. The Swell of Growth, I want to talk about that card for just a second. I mean, be aware of this card when you're playing, guys, because not only do you get the +2/+2 out of it, but you get an instant speed land drop. And
for landfall.
Yeah, so you can get absolutely blown out if your opponent pumps up the creature that you just blocked and then plays a land to trigger the landfall on the creature that you didn't block. Now you're taking a bunch of damage, you're losing your spell. I mean, it could just be a really good card. That's definitely the clear other option for cutting here, simply because I don't think we really have much landfall synergy with this deck. We have a little bit, but not as much as I would like to see to make that card really good.
Yeah, I think I also agree with Josh. I mean, my cuts are maybe between this guy that Josh said, the 3-drop, which is effectively very close to the same card. This one's maybe a little bit stronger, but the 2-drop, maybe you could make the argument that it's going to come down a little bit earlier and trade with something. Or 3-drop already has kind of a lot going on. Or maybe the Swell of Growth. One thing I do like about the Swell of Growth is it could help one of our creatures win a combat against a larger creature, and it still is ramping us up to some of our bigger stuff. So I would say it's between some of these cards. The question is, Josh, do we want to like sneak in like another, like would we want to cut both of these to play like an even bigger drop, but we're already kind of heavy up here. So like, what do you think? Like, what's the limit on how many large creatures like Eldrazi? I mean, I know a lot of times we want to just play all of our Eldrazi because that's what's fun to do, but how many of these cards do you think can we realistically have up here in an 18-land deck with some ramp at the top end of our curve?
I think ultimately you're looking at, I mean, this right here is in the perfect range, the 5 to 6. I definitely wouldn't go over 6. The last thing you want to do is get that opening hand of 3 lands, a 5-drop, a 6-drop, a 7-drop, and fill in the blank for the last one, because then you're just looking at a game where you're going to die before anything happens. We have enough ramp where I definitely think it's worth considering this card, but ultimately with the recursion effect that we have with the Deathless Behemoth, I think we have enough going on up here at the top end that this just isn't necessary. My goal is definitely more staying alive in the early game. And with that said, I did miss the Predator. I think you're right. The 2-drop is a little bit better than the Predator for what we're doing here. So with that said, it comes down to the Predator or the Swell. I really like the idea of playing the Swell just because one thing that this deck is definitely lacking is a little bit of that combat trick, something to allow us to get an advantage in combat other than the sheer size of our creatures. Often with red-green in particular, the sheer size of your creatures is going to be enough, but sometimes you do need that little extra help.
All right, well, I think we'll leave that guy on the bench for now. We'll cut this guy. We're definitely going to be including this within our 18 lands for sure. And you want to take one last look, make sure we maybe didn't miss anything. Do we have the red or the green tap land?
We do not have any other of the lands. Really, the only thing that I see in here that I would potentially consider, we do have these two cards. I want to talk about them real quick. I know Lee touched on Reclaiming Vines a little bit. A good card, one that I'm more than happy to sideboard, but keep these cards in mind. Like, if you are playing against the guy who did open the white rare, the Angel, the new Amiri Angel, or any of the black flyers or blue flyers, Plummet is a card that I wouldn't fault you for even running in your main deck, as sometimes it is going to be dead, but ultimately, you know, it's going to be really good a lot of times as well. And then there are a few cards, there might be maybe some of the retreats do turn out to be that powerful. Maybe your opponent's got one of the really good equipment spells or something, and you want something like the Reclaiming Vines. But ultimately, I don't think I would want to cut anything for either of these in our main deck. And from here,
sounds like we have our 22.
I'm happy with what we have here, and now it's just time to...
Let's talk through the process of adding basic land to that.
All right.
I'm not sure how Josh does it, but I like to just count up the mana symbols. I just did a count while Josh was talking, and we have 14 red symbols and 11 green symbols in the deck. I like to have at least half that number of basic lands in my deck. So for red, I'm looking at a minimum of 7. Again, that's a minimum. And for green, I have 11, so I'm looking at 5 or 6 minimum. Also, we have to consider this because it's a colorless land. It's not going to create one of our colors. We also have to consider when we have double red, which is here and here and here, and how early we want both colors. It looks like here we can use both colors pretty early. So I'm thinking maybe with 18 lands, we go heavy red, but only by 1. So we would play this and then a 9-8 split with 9 being mountains.
I absolutely agree. We're going to go heavier on the mountains just because of the 3 double red spells. I'm not counting Omnath here. You figure when you get to 7 mana, if you don't have 2 of each of your lands, that's going to be extremely odd. And the fact that it's double red, double green, it kind of just cancels each other out. So really we're looking at our early drops. Just like Lee said, we want to make sure that we have access to be able to cast these early. It's a perfect split between red and green. You move into the 3 drops, it starts to favor red, and then it just favors red as you go up the curve here. So perfectly reasonable that you do run the 9-8 with this being our 18th land and the emphasis going on mountains.
Why don't we add those in there and shuffle it up? While you do that, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions here. What do you think the most important card coming out of this set will be for Standard? Week from now, we get a big Standard rotation. My own Standard deck isn't legal anymore.
I've got 3 cards I've been thinking about. The first one is the 3 and a green Converge, the Vigilance and Trample. I think if you play this card in Standard, of course, like we're talking with, like an Abzan shell, let's say. Imagine with this guy, Beast Caller, and with Siege Rhino. That's another 4-drop that it's going to be a 5/5 or maybe even a 6/6 with Vigilance and Trample. That's a pretty powerful card in addition to your Siege Rhinos and Gideons and removal spells and all that other stuff you could play. I think another really fun one that I'm hoping gets there that me and Josh already talked about is this Smothering Abomination. So obviously in Constructed we have more of a way to craft our deck full of, you know, the nulls and the guys the blister pods and the guys that leave behind creatures when they die. We also have access to Dragon Fodder and Hordling Outburst, and we can sit there and just get all sorts of value by sacrificing a creature, draw a card, maybe in a Mardu shell where we have Butcher of the Horde, because we can give that guy haste and lifelink. Every time he sacrifices a guy, we draw a card. I mean, don't you guys want to go sacrifice 2 goblins, haste lifelink, draw 2 cards, attack your opponent for 5 with this guy in play? It just seems crazy. And lastly, I think maybe Drana, the vampire. It's a flyer, and also don't forget it has first strike. So Drana's trigger actually goes on before combat damage. So if you attack with Drana and a bunch of goblins, the first strike is going to happen. Drana's trigger is going to happen. It's going to pump all of your goblins. I think she looks like a really powerful card for standard as well because she cuts out of range of the lightning, like the whatever the dragon, the three damage, dragon roar, draconic roar, pretty quickly. I think all those cards will be good for standard. What are you excited about?
The cards that I'm really looking at, I mean, we've already talked about Gideon, so I won't spend really much more time on that. That card just looks very, very powerful. I think the Hero's Downfall replacement is going to be very, very good. You sacrifice the ability to cast it as an instant for the ability to awaken later in the game. Think about just the number of times where you're playing against a Esper Dragons deck or a Abzan control deck, and you get to that point where your Hero's Downfall was just a removal spell. Still very good, but chances are you were casting it at sorcery speed anyway to prevent any shenanigans from your opponent. Well, now you just get to pay 3 extra mana and get a creature out of it too. So the value-added cards. Also, I'm very curious to see. I want it to work. It's kind of like the one that I'm thinking of, but Oblivion Sower. The 6 mana 5/8 that when it comes into play, you exile the top 4 cards of your opponent's deck, and then you can play any lands from exile just for free. Well, one of the things that I noticed when I was reading that card is it's not exiled by this. So
it
if
with Dig Through Time and Tassagoyf
exactly, so your opponent's sitting there delving away. Well, now you just have this crazy ramp spell. I mean, granted it's 6 mana, but you get 4, 5, 6 lands out of it potentially. Some fetch lands, which may or may not be relevant to your colors, but just other good things that could come out. Plus, if your deck is also doing any sort of ingest or any sort of mill effects or exile effects, it's just a card that I think has a lot of potential.
So we've been shuffling that up for a while. Let's try an opening hand to see how it looks.
Uh-oh. 7. All right, let's see what we got. Got a couple forests. We got a Blighted Gorge.
Uh-oh. All right, well, our opening hand is going to be a mulligan. And this is going to...
Let's look at that. Let's
throw
it away right away. Let's take a look at it. Why are we going to mulligan this?
I mean, this is going to be one of the pitfalls and potential risks anytime you run 18 lands, but it can happen no matter how many lands you're running. When I was first learning Magic, someone once told me that a hand like this, basically every time you draw a land, you're giving your opponent a free time walk. And that's a really bad place to be.
Let's mulligan it away and see what happens. While you're shuffling that up for a mulligan, is there anything in the format that you're looking at for Eternal formats? Anything that's going to impact Modern or Legacy out of this?
The manlands for sure will. The Shambling Vent is playable in a lot of the, I guess like the Mardu kind of based, like the black-white tokens deck maybe in Modern. The other manland I think as well gives new possibilities. Obviously manlands are really strong. I mean I play a lot of Jund in Modern, so Raging Ravine is just one of the best threats in the deck, and I think giving other colors access to that is going to be really powerful. Maybe the Sowing Salt card, the card that is 3 in a red and is basically a Sowing Salt. That could be pretty good in Modern because it allows like Splinter Twin or other decks that don't have the double red to potentially play a Sowing Salt type effect.
Yep. Another card I think is worth looking at is the, I can't remember the name of it, but it's the double Eternal Witness. So you take Eternal Witness and double everything. You double the cost. Instead of green 1, it's now green 4. You get a 5/4 body out. It's either 4/5 or a 5/4. You get to get a card out of your graveyard when you cast it. You get to get a card out of your graveyard when it dies. Birthing Pod players everywhere just cried another little tear that their favorite card is banned. But it's a card that I think has a lot of potential, and I've always had a soft spot for Eternal Witness, so this card just makes me happy.
You just brought up Birthing Pod. Monday's the new banned list. What's getting it? Is there anything being banned on Monday?
Oh, man. I think there's going to be no changes because I think the format is very healthy. I mean, we saw at Oklahoma City a bunch of different decks in the top 8, a bunch of different decks in the top 16, a bunch of different decks. I mean, anything, anywhere from, Zoo to Collected Company to Burn to Tron to Splinter Twin to
Grixis Control to
Lantern Control
You're
to.
mostly talking about Modern right now. What about
Yeah.
Legacy?
I don't have a big history in Legacy. Most of my Legacy comes from watching events, but I don't see anything. When Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time, the most recent cards hit, were in Legacy, it was pretty obvious there was something wrong. Nothing is obviously wrong to me right now. The Legacy format looks like exactly what it's been set up to be.
So we've mulliganed. How do those 6 look?
Oh, this looks pretty good. So we have both of our colors. We have a Kozilek Sentinel, which can probably block for a while and buy us some time. We have our Swell of Growth, which can ramp us hopefully into maybe Stone Fury or this Beastmaster. We do kind of need to draw some lands with this deck, or excuse me, with this hand to make it good. But we are playing 18 lands, so we would like to assume that we can draw a couple lands and.
And I'm actually pretty happy we had to mulligan this hand, because today is the beginning of the Vancouver mulligan rule for all of us.
Is it really?
It is.
Right.
Today?
So you get to scry one now.
Oh man.
So that took a
Scry
hand
me
that
a
I would have.
river.
I would have kept this hand regardless, because this hand is definitely better than a random 5. But knowing that we also get to look at our top 1, I don't think there's a single card in our deck that we could see right now that is a non-land that we would leave on top.
Yeah, correct. I mean, something we might scry at the bottom in this situation is one of our huge creatures.
So what is it? Let's take a look at that scry.
All right, it is. Oh man, that's the worst. That is the absolute worst. So, oh man. So if you guys ever wonder,
Now you have a tough decision to make. How many shuffle effects do we have in the deck?
We have 0. Basically, if we put Omnath at the bottom here, we're not getting Omnath this game. But I think that the chances of us leaving it on top, the chances of us ever getting to cast it are so slim, knowing that we need to draw 5 lands on top of the fact that Omnath is right there, means we don't really have a choice. It has to go to the bottom, and we're just going to have to win this game without it.
Okay.
I will happily put this to the bottom as well. Well, maybe not happily. Maybe I'm a little salty about it, but I think we're gonna have to put that on the bottom of our deck. But you guys notice, like, we just have to play a good game of Magic here, because we've mulliganed and we got one of our best cards on the bottom. So we'll see what happens.
And Lee brings up a really good point. When you're playing in these limited environments, manage your resources. Don't throw things away. Ask yourself, what's better for me right now? Taking that 2 points of damage or sacrificing my creature here? So it's just something that I see a lot of, especially newer players do. They try and protect their life total like it's the end-all be-all. And one of the first things that I learned in Magic was the only life point that matters is the last one. So remember your life is a resource as well. When you're in a situation like this where it's very possible you could fall behind early, you're going to have to battle back, every card is going to be extremely valuable.
You guys worked together to build this deck. How do you feel about it? We're going to be 80 players in 6 rounds today. How does this deck do today?
I give this deck about a 6 out of 10. It's got bombs that I'm really happy about, bombs that can just come down and win the game. But it doesn't have the early power that I would hope. It doesn't have some of the ramp spells. I was definitely hoping that if I was going to be able to do, especially this color combination, I'd have some more of the Scion generators.
Yeah, I think I agree with Josh. It definitely isn't. It's a pretty good deck. I mean, I'd give it maybe a 6 or a 7 out of 10 as well. I'd be pretty happy to play it. I think it has some great bomb potential, and our late game is just absurd. But I think I agree with Josh. If in a perfect world, we maybe would have gotten a couple more of the early enablers, some of the early ramp, Scion kind of stuff to just really make it optimal. But it still seems like a pretty good deck.
Yeah, I'd be confident that I could win with this deck. But yeah, it's solid. It's above average, but not by much.
Hey, guys, thanks for coming out and doing this today. This was a lot of fun.
Sweet. Yeah, we had fun too.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We'll do it again soon, guys.
All right.
All right. Dude, check out these lands, though.